afternoon, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Dan Clemens Show, a Christian political talk show. This is episode 877. I'm your host, Dan Clemens, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. It is September the 5th in year of award 2017. Remember, we're a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful, rainy Central Susquehanna Valley in the Great Keystone State. I have both chat rooms open and on Blog Talk Radio and YouTube. I have it set up where I can see both of them. Today, I promised the folks over at Indivisible Guide on Facebook that I was going to do a rebuttal video of a video that Robert B. Riech, sort of imitating Rush Limbaugh there. He was in the Clinton administration, Mr. Riech, and whether he is economically illiterate or not, I think is beside the point. He put out a rebuttal video against Trump's corporate tax cuts. And as usual, the Indivisible Guide and Robert B. Riech are both what I consider to be in the anti-freedom crowd in America. They don't want anybody that they disagree with to have any type of freedom whatsoever, whether it's tax freedom or freedom of speech or anything like that. And Indivisible Guide has proven time and time again that they stand with groups like Antifa. My antagonists on Facebook that are part of Indivisible Guide, they will not denounce Antifa and Antifa's violence. They will not denounce the violence of Black Lives Matters. And so they've sided with these two anti-freedom groups. And the reason I believe that they have such a big following is because people are willfully ignorant of the facts. Indivisible Guide, and especially Robert B. Riech, are propagandists. They put out propaganda that benefits them politically. And when I try to explain in Facebook on a couple small points that Mr. Riech had gotten wrong, I was just blasted. Because who am I? I'm a nobody compared to Riech. Just because Riech has some notoriety, he's been in politics, he was in the Clinton administration, that he's got to be smarter than me. And that is, for the most part, folks, with the anti-freedom crowd out there, if you're not an elitist, if you're not educated, you cannot educate yourselves. I told these folks I study economics as a hobby. And that went over like a lead balloon, folks, with these, well, just because you say you study it doesn't mean you know anything about economics. Well, no, it may not mean that I know anything, but I do my research. I know where to find the answers, and I know some of the answers. And just listening to the video in its entirety the first time, I must have listened about 10 times in its entirety. I have it set up on my open broadcast studio to where I can start and stop it as we go through it, because he makes 7 points. And it's strange to me how someone can make a rebuttal video against any issue and they get all their points horribly wrong. Now, I'm not saying there's not a grain of truth in any of his points. I'm not saying that at all. But in order for him to get his points across and to make them sound plausible and truthful, he has to cherry pick. Again, we're talking about a narrative inside an echo chamber that they've already, the conclusion is Donald Trump, no matter what he does, is going to be bad. So now we just go out and find the facts that fit that. And I went out and been finding the facts, mostly from Foundation for Economic Education, because they're my go-to site for economic education. They are Austrian economics. They are very libertarian-minded when it comes to economics. They think along the same lines as Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard when they talk about economics in the sense that human action. And that was Ludwig von Mises' treatise, his biggest book. I think his most important contribution to Austrian economics was Human Action. And it talks about how humans interact with the economy. Folks like Robert B. Riech, they adhere to the Keynesian form of economics, where the actions of people have very little to do with the economy. It's more driven by the government and what the government does, and what the government chooses to spend things on, things like that, tax policies, which there's a kernel of truth to the tax policies, but that's their thinking, which is a very anti-freedom way of thinking, because what they do, and I'm going to get into this into the video here, but just to set this thing up, what Robert B. Reich does in this video is he, like I talked about yesterday, he sets this idea up of coveting and envy, covetousness and envy, and he's always hammering these large profitable corporations, which he never tells you what percentage of corporate America that these large profitable corporations are, and they are on the whole a small percentage compared to all the corporations that are out there. So again, cherry picking your facts to elicit this type of covetousness and envy from your followers in Indivisible group and the other anti-freedom groups out there. And again, refer to my show yesterday, episode 876. Hopefully I did a decent job of explaining, why covetousness and envy always leads to socialism. And this is exactly, if you take his ideas in this video that I'm going to share with you shortly, if you take his ideas and take them to the upteenth degree, as it were, you'll see that they don't hold water. That a lot of these things that he's talking about are factually incorrect, because again, he cherry picks things. I'm not saying there's not a kernel of truth to what he's saying. What I am saying is he cherry picks a statistic and extrapolates that out to all of corporate America. But he does use the term large or profitable corporations, which is a good chunk, but not the vast majority still of our corporate America, and we'll get into that. Let me see here. Where's it at? Bluehost. There it is. If you're like me and you got something to say and you want to say it on the internet, you got a blog you want to write, no matter what it is, about family, about motherhood, fatherhood, whatever it is, a hobby you have. Or if you're a political junkie like me and you want to comment on politics of the day and you want to start a blog, or you want to start a show like I have and you want to use the internet site for your show notes page, whatever it is, going back to school and you want to set up, something like a tutorial, be a tutor and you want to set up a website to help students you're tutoring, whatever the case may be, Bluehost is where you want to be. Bluehost is what I use for the DanClementShow.com. It's my show notes page. I archive all my audio there, along with Blog Talk Radio, but I have links in every show notes page to the audio, and you can listen to those. You get free domains with Bluehost. You get free site builders, which are fantastic. The free stuff they have on there is great. I've used free stuff for a long time on the DanClementShow.com. I just recently went to a pro version of my website, and I'm slowly building that out to make it look more functional, make it look more professional. They have a one-click install WordPress, which is great. Without WordPress, I wouldn't have my donation button for PayPal on there, which I keep forgetting to tell people about now. And it's on every page. When you open up the page, the donation button for PayPal, for Patreon's on each page. And so you're not just strictly limited to Patreon. If you want to make donations to the show, you can do it through the donation button. But folks, the best thing they have is 24/7 support. And they have really good prices on these right now, starting at $2.95 a month for back to school specials. Please go to the DanClementShow.com, and in the upper header you'll see the Bluehost widget. Click on that, take you over to Bluehost, and by doing so you'll be helping me with the show, supporting my show, because they're an affiliate sponsor of this program. So if you want a web presence, the best place to go for your hosting is Bluehost. I've been on a bunch of different sites, folks, and by far I think Bluehost is the best. All right, today's daily Bible reading comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, verses 44 through 49. And this is Jesus talking. Then he said to them, "These are the words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, and all things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms concerning me." and he opened their understanding that they might comprehend the scriptures. Then he said to them, thus it is written, and thus it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead the third day, and that repentance and remission of sins should be preached in his name in all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. And you are witnesses of these things. Behold, I send the promise of my Father upon you, but tarry in the city of Jerusalem until you are endowed with power from on high. And this is Jesus' departing words to his disciples that were there. There was an estimated, somewhere 150 disciples that were around her, plus his apostles. And he's mainly talking to the apostles, but all his disciples were listening to him. And I just think this is really neat that that Jesus fulfilled everything that was written of him, the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms concerning him. Nobody else could have done this. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, Son of Man, is the only person in history that could have fulfilled all these prophecies and all these things and sayings that were spoken of him in the Old Testament. And I think that's very, very neat. Today's quote meal comes from Helen Keller. If the blind put their hand in God's, they find their way more surely than those who see but have no faith or purpose. Very, very good. Short Bible lesson today comes from Kevin Cowley over at gewatkins.net. And Kevin's saying, his title is, I don't want you to join my church. Amen. I don't want anybody to join my church, because my church isn't a good church to join. It really isn't. I want you to go to the Lord's church. I often say on my Friday show, at the end of my Friday show, that on Sunday you need to go to the church of God's choice, not your choice or my choice. We need to go to the church of God's choice. So it's a bulletin article. It's not very long, but it's really good. Kevin really packs a lot in his bulletin articles as he goes through those things. Get a little bit of my Rocky Mountain High Brand lemonade here. I always have it in a cup like this because it's a air gap cup, and I put ice in it, and that way it holds through the show, and it doesn't get it still gets a little bit sweaty, but not too bad, and it keeps my refreshments cool to drink. All right, folks. Well, let's see here. I have this video set up, but I have one more article that I want to talk about before I get into this, because this is going to take the rest of the show here. There was an article put up by Wired.com, written by Clint Finley, Finley. FCC's broken comment system could help doom net neutrality. And this was posted on September 2nd of this year. And basically what they're saying is they're on mostly from the pro-net neutrality side, but there was some from the the folks that wanted to get rid of net neutrality, that were against net neutrality. There was these spam bots, these auto email senders and stuff like that were sending tens of thousands of comments I think they got like 21 million comments or so, but there was a whole bunch. I mean, there was so many of the samplings that they were taking that it's calling the whole comment session into question about net neutrality, whether we're going to keep it, whether we shouldn't. Now, you've heard my views on it. It's net neutrality is very anti-freedom, anti-competition. It puts the government in control of our internet. And as I've told my son, and I've told people, thousands of times before, a government big enough to give you everything is also big enough to take those things away. And I don't want any government in charge of my internet. Competition will take care of a lot of things on the internet, folks. So I don't want the government in charge of anything. But this is something that's ongoing here. I was sharing some articles with folks about how some of these Germany and some other countries are actually clamping down on wrong speech, as it were. And the folks here in the United States say, oh, they don't. There's none of these other countries that do that. And then when I show them these articles, like on Facebook or Twitter, saying they absolutely do, they don't want to listen. It's outside their echo chamber. And sometimes you just feel like you're just beating your fist against a wall with no door on it when you're talking about echo chambers. And it amazes me how supposedly intelligent people will allow themselves to get trapped in an echo chamber. It really is. And again, now, I don't know why. I have to say this qualifier all the time. I'm not a Republican. I'm a member of the Constitution Party. I'm a constitutional conservative. I'm a Christian. I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I voted for Darrell Castle of the Constitution Party. I agree with some things that President Trump has done, and I disagree with some things he's done or proposes to do. His tax plan are one of the things I agree with. I believe that cutting taxes across the board for individuals and corporations, and I'll get into that when we get into this rebuttal video, because Robert B. Riech makes an erroneous assumption about corporate taxes when he talks about what they call the pass-through tax, and we'll get into that. I'll talk about that. And he is of the persuasion, the erroneous, false idea that when you cut taxes, that it brings more revenue into the treasury and boosts the economy. Robert Reich is a socialist / communist. He believes in Keynesian economics, which is part of socialism, where government controls the economy. He does not believe in allowing you or I as individuals to have any more freedom than he deems us necessary to have. And that right there, that ideology he has there about freedom and liberty puts him squarely in the anti-freedom and anti-liberty camp, in my opinion, my humble opinion. So, again, it amazes me how someone that's supposed to be so connected can get so many things so wrong on this whole thing. And I imagine he's probably for net neutrality too. I've never really looked and seen what his thoughts were on net neutrality, but again, it amazes me how he'll put a video out like this and so many people will just take him at his word. Well, this is Robert B. Reich. And this is, someone we need to listen to, and he makes sense because he's appealing. And if you watch this video, what I'll do is, I don't know if I get dinged on fair use or not. I really don't. I don't think I will be, because this is a rebuttal video. I'd like to play it all the way through for you at the beginning, but I think what I'm going to do is go through all my points. There's 7 points that he makes. I'm going to go through on each point, and we'll make these points as we go along here, and I'll stop the video and restart it, and then at the end, if we have time, I'll play the whole thing through. But I'm still debating that because, like I said, this fair use. If he doesn't like what I'm saying, he could just go to YouTube, whether he's got proof or not, whether it's fair use or not, and just get me dinged for this isn't fair use. Him playing the whole video. So I'm still debating that, but we'll see what the time constraints are by the time we get through the end of the show. I got 40 minutes, and I think I'm still going to be pushing it to get through this whole video. So Robert Reich is in this video, and he makes 7 points in this video, and we're going to rebut every point that he puts out. And I have links to articles, mostly from the Foundation for Economic Education, or fee.org, FEE.org. Most of them are from them. Some of them are from the taxfoundation.org. And let's see, and the Government Accountability Office actually has one that he cites, and this is where he actually cherry picks some of his information. So let's get over here, let's get everything set up here, and we'll get right over to this.
Donald Trump wants to cut the corporate income tax rate from 35% to 15% in order to, in his words, make the United States more competitive, unquote. This is nonsense for 7 reasons. First, profitable U.S. corporations already pay an average of only 14%, according to the Government Accountability Office. That's less than a lot of middle-class families pay. and that's less than half the official 35% corporate tax rate. What's more, some giant corporations pay little, if any, U.S. taxes because of loopholes or because they shift their profits offshore to tax havens. Second,
all right, folks, we're going to go through this step by step, and it's going to take me a little bit to get back and forth on my audio here because of the way OBS is set up. And I wish I could set it up a different way, but it just they're not there yet on their controls. Now, he talks about, in his first point there, Riech only looks at one small part of the corporate America. He calls the effective tax rate. And I have two articles on this, but the one I really want to zero in on is from the Government Accountability Office. And basically, he talks about an effective corporate tax rate of 14%. Okay, so they're already the large, we call it profitable large corporations. Now, the latest information we have from the GAO, and I've been trying, I was scouring the internet past couple of days to try to find this, is the latest we have that they've had everything compiled is 2012. It's like 5 years old. And this is one of the problems with the government. They're so slow in getting information out. But even back in 2012, large, profitable corporations made up less than 20%. It was like 19.5% out of all the corporations in America. Okay, and they call large profitable corporations, or let's say large corporations, because they have and I didn't have a chance to get this graph over on the other page over there, but basically there's three categories: all active corporations, large corporations, and profitable large corporations. Out of the two, large corporations and profitable corporations only make up 42.3% of all corporations in America. That means that there's close to 47%, or a little over 47% of corporations in America. Okay, no, it's more than that. 57%. I'm sorry. 57% of corporations in America are not large, and they're not large profitable corporations. They're mom and pops. I could be a corporation if I filed the paperwork. Okay, I was part of a partnership years ago, and it wasn't a corporation, but because we filed as a partnership, we could split the taxes up between the two of us, but I don't want to get into all that. So he cherry picks the 14% in that study, the Government Accountability Office study, and he leaves everything else out. And corporations that did have a federal corporate income tax liability for the year 2012, they owed $267.5 billion in taxes. So wasn't it that they weren't paying taxes? And his 14% was talking about, if you go down in the figures here, for the tax year 2008 to 2012, profitable large U.S. corporations that are less than like 19.5% of the country, or all corporations, paid on average U.S. federal income tax amounting to about 14% of the pre-tax net income that they reported in their financial statements for those entities included in their tax returns. When foreign, state, and local income taxes are included, the average estimated tax on these corporations across all those years was just over 22%. Okay, so he's only picking on the federal, but if you talk about the full tax liabilities of these corporations, it's 22%. So it's not anywhere near the 14%. And he's only talking about a group of corporations that only makes up 19.5% of all corporations in the country. And the other thing you have to remember, and he's going to get into some of these tax loopholes and stuff like that in this next point, is corporations enjoy loopholes just like any other. The large profitable ones enjoy the same loopholes as all active corporations. And there's a lot of loopholes that we enjoy as individuals that corporations enjoy. We as individuals have deductions and loopholes that we, marriage deduction, mortgage deduction, all these things we can use to lessen our tax burdens. Okay? So Again, this is one of these things where he cherry picks a fact and puts that out there. Now, that was from the GAO. Like I said, the other one, let me get over to it here real quick. The U.S. corporate effective tax rate, myth and facts. And there's a study, there's a PDF here. This was put out in 2014 by the taxfoundation.org by Jack Mintz. This was authored by, and there's a couple PDFs you can actually download and actually look at those. I skimmed at them briefly. But some key points: the marginal effective tax rate on corporate investment, i.e. the tax impact on capital investment as a portion of the cost of capital, is 35.3% in the U.S., higher than in any other developed country. Now, this is the other point that he fails to tell his listeners at Indivisible Group and their followers. He's talking about these on investments. These evil corporations make a profit and they want to invest these things. And again, later on, we're going to talk about how cutting taxes on capital gains, actually spurs the economy on. But to listen to Robert B. Reich talk about this, he doesn't even mention it as far as investments. He's taking the whole corporation as a whole and packaging the whole thing in, well, these people don't pay as much taxes percentage-wise as somebody making $60,000 a year. But my point, when you use percentages instead of using real numbers, and this is the numbers game here, when you use percentages over real numbers, it makes it look unfair. But again, fair is a very subjective term. And so if a company has $1 billion in profit and has to pay 15%, let's say, that's what the corporate tax rate that Donald Trump wants to bring in, he's going to pay number-wise in magnitude far more than somebody who's making $100,000. Somebody making $100,000, 15%, is going to pay $15,000. Okay, someone making $1 billion, and paying 15% on $1 billion, if my math is right, I think it's $150 million on that money for that $1 billion. Okay, that's nothing to sneeze at. So that's why they use percentages, and that's something you have to be careful of. When people start talking about percentages, they're laying a trap for folks. They really, really are. Secondly, and this just some key points here, the U.S. has maintained the highest METR, the marginal effective tax rate, in the OECD since 2007. That's with all these advanced economies and stuff like this. When Canada's multi-year program of corporate tax reform brought its METR below the G7 average. Nonetheless, the White House and Treasury Department continue to assert that the U.S. has a lower METR than Canada by failing to properly account for sales and property tax. Now, this report was put out in 2014, so guess who was still in office back then? And that's something, there's some facts we're going to bring out that Robert B. Reich didn't bring out in his video there. The U.S. METR varies by industry from 26.7% for the transportation to 39.3% for communications. The U.S. average effective tax rate on corporations is irregular from year to year due to the complexity and instability of the corporate tax code. Because that can change from year to year, folks, on the corporate tax code, depending on the whims of Congress. Exceedingly high U.S. tax rates have shrunk the U.S. corporate sector and reduced corporate tax revenues. Basically, and he'll get into this in his video, these corporations shelter some of their money offshore. Oh, how horrible that these corporations shelter their tax dollars or their money offshore so they don't have to pay taxes on it. There are, and I didn't add them in here over the past week when I've been studying on this. There are quite a few individuals, including lower income, and what I say by lower income individuals, people making $100,000 or more, that actually have accounts in the British Virgin Islands and the Cayman Islands, stuff like that, because their money can grow in those accounts and not be taxed at American tax rates. So it's like, okay, so we shelter some of our money to invest it elsewhere so we're not having to pay taxes on it. To me, that's a freedom move there. It's a liberty move. Of course, socialists and communists don't think that way. They think that all your money is their money. And that's how they actually go about that. So that's the first point. Second, let's get into the second point here of his video.
Donald Trump wants to cut the corporate income tax rate from 35% to 15% in order to, in his words, make the United States more competitive, unquote. This is nonsense for 7 reasons. First, profitable U.S. corporations already pay an average of only 14%, according to the Government Accountability Office. That's less than a lot of middle-class families pay. And that's less than half the official 35% corporate tax rate. What's more, some giant corporations pay little, if any, U.S. taxes because of loopholes or because they shift their profits offshore to tax havens. Second, Trump's corporate tax cut will bust the federal budget. The Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center projects it will reduce federal revenues by $2.4 trillion. That's trillion dollars over 10 years. This will either require huge cuts in services for all of us or additional taxes paid by us to pick up the corporate tab. Number 3.
All right, folks, I apologize. For some reason, that video is not working right. I had it working before the show. Everything was working right. I get into the show, and it does not want to pick up where I left off at. So I'm going to have to change tactics here and go to my desktop and see if I can play the video there. But his second point was about dropping revenue to the federal tax coffers. And this one here is so fallacious that it doesn't even need any explanation. All you have to do is be a history student of current history, and you can see I have an article here. It's called History is on the Side of Tax Cuts by Ralph R. Rhineland over at FEE.org. And let me just bring that up here so I can see it here. And this was posted on May 11, 2017. And he's talking about Ronald Reagan and John F. Kennedy. Both of them cut the corporate tax rates, and there was a huge boom that started in the economy. Now, it didn't start right away, but it started, and it actually lasted for decades. You know, Ronald Reagan's lasted up until pretty much until George W. Bush got into office, and at that time, because of the Clinton administration and all their finagling with the economy and stuff like that, started to slow things down with the Reagan tax cuts and Reagan economics and that, and the economic boom that we sustained during the Reagan era, which was up to let's see, 4.8% yearly growth, and when he became president, it was 0.9%. Okay, so it got up to 4.8%, and unemployment dropped from 9.7 down to 5.5. It cleared down in 1988, and so during his presidency, things were just booming, and they extended clear out through the 90s. And the same way John F. Kennedy back in the 1960s. His economic boom went clear through, the end of 1969 into the early 70s. So their tax cuts absolutely spurred job growth. They put more money in the coffers of the federal, in the Treasury Department, because people were less likely to shelter their money. When you have high tax rates, folks shelter their money. Matter of fact, Reagan was talking about when he, at the height of his movie career, he was making 6 cents on the dollar. He was 96% of his money was taken by the federal government. So he was making 6 cents on the dollar. And the only reason why he didn't quit, because they had one scene in the movie Nick Romney where there's a farmer and a horse, and that scene took 70 people. It employed 70 people to do that scene. It's the only reason why he didn't quit acting. And matter of fact, and people don't know this, Ronald Reagan's education was in economics. And this is just, like I said, this is searchable, knowable, verifiable history that we have here. So, like I said, got to get onto the, let me see here. Busted the federal budget. We need spending. Yes, and this is the other point that I want to make with the second point. Okay, that he claims it's busted the federal government. It's going to bring $2.4 trillion less into the economy or into the Treasury over a 10 years period. But he never tackles the issue of, and this is a historical fact, about the job growth and the capital utilization here in the United States or any country, that when you lessen the taxes on it, more money flows into the economy via they take them out of tax shelters and actually put them to work, because the money's not going to be taxed at such a high rate. Robert Reich and anti-freedom folks like him and the groups that follow him do not understand this. They do not extrapolate that out, saying, well, if we cut taxes, it will create growth. And it does. History is on the freedom side of things here. But he never mentions that. It's always how it's going to be cut here. You know, that we're going to have less revenues, which means we're going to have to cut government spending somewhere, which means services to you. He never talks about all the government services that the federal government isn't supposed to be doing. He just talks about the ones that affect individuals. Well, you're going to get your stuff cut, but the corporations, they're going to have a heyday here. You know, it's that type of mentality that just drives me nuts. And again, I'm just a rogue scholar. And if I can figure this out as a rogue scholar, you would think someone like Robert B. Reich could figure it out too. But again, he's propagandizing. He doesn't want the truth to be known out there. He wants to whip up the frenzy of the mob that is in the anti-freedom groups out there by not telling them the whole truth and putting the corporations and setting them against individuals, and how un-American and how just unethical and immoral for these corporations to make a profit, and some of the profits they do make. Class envy, covetousness, envy, socialism. That's what Robert B. Reich wants. He wants socialism, folks. He doesn't want you to have freedom with your money, to spend your money how you want. And most people I know, even most staunch libertarians, aren't 100% against taxes for the state. They just want a limited state. Some of them don't want any state, but I'm talking about some that don't go that far. Taxes are okay as long as they're limited, and the private sector does everything else. That's where it goes. Now, so I'm going to reset this back up, and we're going to go through. I'm going to open up the desktop, and we're going to go on there. So give me just a second to get over on the desktop.
Government Accountability Office. That's less than a lot of middle-class families pay. And that's less than half the official 35% corporate tax rate. What's more, some giant corporations pay little, if any, U.S. taxes because of loopholes or because they shift their profits offshore to tax havens. Second, Trump's corporate tax cut will bust the federal budget. The Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center projects it will reduce federal revenues by $2.4 trillion. That's trillion. Donald Trump wants to cut the corporate income tax rate from 35% to 15% in order to, in his words, make the United States more competitive, unquote. This is nonsense for 7 reasons. First, profitable U.S. corporations already pay an average of only 14%, according to the Government Accountability Office. That's less than a lot of middle-class families pay. And that's less than half the official 35% corporate tax rate. What's more, some giant corporations pay little, if any, U.S. taxes because of loopholes or because they shift their profits offshore to tax havens. Second, Trump's corporate tax cut will bust the federal budget. The Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center projects it will reduce federal revenues by $2.4 trillion. That's trillion dollars over 10 years. This will either require huge cuts in services for all of us or additional taxes paid by us to pick up the corporate tab. Number 3, the White House says the tax cuts will create a jump in economic growth that will generate enough new revenue to wipe out any increase in the budget deficit. This is supply-side, trickle-down nonsense. Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush both cut taxes mostly for the rich, and both ended their presidencies with huge budget deficits. Fourth.
All right, that one there, if you're on YouTube, you'll have seen the graph. And the one he leaves out, and we're talking about 2017. And we had 8 years of a presidency that he totally left out of that as far as budget deficits. And President Obama's presidency is a classic example of what happens when you tax and spend. And I have an article here. I won't go over the whole thing. You can go look at this, but it's an article here about Obama had presided over 5 of the 6 largest deficits, budget deficits in U.S. history. 5 of the 6. But Robert B. Reich, he left that little tidbit out. And yes, they ran budget deficits because the spending was not cut. Tip O'Neill under President Reagan he gave him the tax cuts, and it was a deal that, look, we'll give you these tax cuts as long as, and this is what Ronald Reagan was saying, we need to come back and do spending cuts. And Tip O'Neill, because of their economic ignorance, said, yeah, we'll give you the tax cuts, but it's not going to help you with anything. We just won't do any spending cuts, ha, ha, ha. And that's what happened. A lot of it was Congress holds the purse strings. And the president, he can't get tax cuts through without Congress. And President Reagan was working against, guess what, a Democrat Congress who was unwilling to do the tax cuts. But because Ronald Reagan knew his economics and knew them well, he knew that the growth that his tax cuts would actually cause would overcome the no spending cuts. So yes, he did run deficits, but it wasn't because of his tax cuts. He ran deficits because they wouldn't cut government spending. And this is what Robert B. Reich types and Indivisible guys and those folks in the anti-freedom crowd that support them, this is what they don't understand. And it's real easy to understand in your personal budgets, folks. If you're bringing in less revenue, you got to make some cuts. And if you're bringing in more revenue, you can spend more if you want, but you're better to save because maybe you just came out of a period of not making a whole lot of money. And so you know that there's rainy days here and there. So you need to save your money and invest a little bit to make it work while you're working. But the way the government has our tax codes and everything set up, we don't even save anymore. We have one of the lowest saving rates in U.S. history today. because people don't save. And that's a shame, because where do you think banks get their money to loan if people don't save? They got to borrow it themselves at a lower rate in order for them to make money and be profitable. That's, to me, that's simple economics there. So he talks about how it won't spur the economy. He doesn't talk about the 5 of the 6 largest deficits that President Obama resided over. He didn't talk about his deficit spending, or his stimulus package, Economic Recovery Act. They didn't talk about that, all that spending that he did. No. We're talking 1.2 trillion dollar budget deficits during the Obama administration. So if he's not, folks, and this is the thing we only got up to 0.3, and he hasn't told you any of the truths at all. Now we're getting close on time, and like I said, this whole thing has got me a little frustrated. Let's go over. Let's do this next one here.
Donald Trump wants to cut the corporate income tax rate from 35% to 15% in order to, in his words, make the United States more competitive, unquote. This is nonsense for 7 reasons. First, profitable U.S. corporations already pay an average of only 14%, according to the Government Accountability Office. That's less than a lot of middle-class families pay. And that's less than half the official 35% corporate tax rate. What's more, some giant corporations pay little, if any, U.S. taxes because of loopholes or because they shift their profits offshore to tax havens. Second, Trump's corporate tax cut will bust the federal budget. The Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center projects it will reduce federal revenues by $2.4 trillion. That's trillion dollars over 10 years. This will either require huge cuts in services for all of us or additional taxes paid by us to pick up the corporate tab. Number 3, the White House says the tax cuts will create a jump in economic growth that will generate enough new revenue to wipe out any increase in the budget deficit. This is supply-side, trickle-down nonsense. Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush both cut taxes mostly for the rich, and both ended their presidencies with huge budget deficits. Fourth, Trump's plan will create a new special loophole that allows hedge fund managers, big law firms, and real estate moguls like Donald Trump to slash the pass-through tax rate they pay on their business income, dropping it from 40% to 15%. 15% is what a middle-class person pays. Do you think people like Donald Trump should pay a tax rate that someone making $60,000 a year pays? Fifth, the plan also creates an international race to the bottom on corporate tax rates that the United States cannot possibly win. One of its supposed attractions is it makes U.S. corporation taxes more competitive internationally, but we can't match the rates in tax havens, which are often zero. And other countries will just lower their taxes in response. That's what happened after 1986, the last time the United States cut corporate tax rates. Number 6, American corporations don't need a tax cut. They're already hugely competitive, as measured by their profits, which are near record highs, while the share of taxes they pay are at record lows. Corporations should be doing more to pay their fair share, not getting a giant tax cut. Number 7, the White House says corporations will use the extra profits they get from the tax cut to invest in more capacity and jobs. Rubbish. Corporations are now using a large portion of their profits to pay their CEOs hefty pay packages and to buy other companies in order to raise their stock prices. There's no reason to suppose they'll do any different even with more profits. So don't fall for Trump's corporate tax plan. It will be a huge windfall for corporations and billionaires, like many of Trump's own cabinet members, family members, and likely even Trump himself. Though because he won't release his taxes, we can't tell how much he'll enrich himself from his own tax plan. But we do know who will lose out: the rest of us.
Now, folks, you've seen there at the end, MoveOn.org was part of this. I'm sorry I just went ahead and played the whole video straight through because it just, for whatever reason, it was not playing right in my player here. So I have to work on that this week and find out why that didn't do that. All right, we left off at the number 4, loopholes, where he talks about tax loopholes and these tax havens that they can hide their money in. And I have some good articles here in the moral defense of tax havens, and this is from a speech it was given years ago by Ludwig von Mises at the fee.org. And let me get into this. Let me see. He did it. The moral defense of tax havens, and this was taken from a abridged speech delivered at evening at FEE in June 2006 by Donald J. Mitchell, and this is based off of some of Ludwig von Mises. And it's very good. He talks about tax havens in there, and he talks about how they are good. And the reason why tax havens are good is because they protect capital. Capital is the key to growth. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot have growth, and Obama's 8 years should have proved that. You cannot have growth with government stimulus. It doesn't work. And people start hiding their capital because the government's going to come after it. And so they take and put it in these tax havens, and it still gets invested. It's not like this money sits in these tax havens. This is the big fallacy here. It sits in these tax havens and do nothing. It's not like they sit in there and do nothing. They actually, the money is invested. But the problem is, if it's invested through these tax havens, they don't pay American corporate taxes on the capital that they make, the capital gains that they make. And this is the biggest fallacy in economics. It's hard for me to explain because I don't have a complete grasp of it. I just have a basic understanding of it, but I do know that you can't make money without having money. It doesn't work. These get-rich-quick schemes on the internet, they don't work. They have never worked. All they are is Ponzi schemes. They're getting your money, and you're not getting anything in return. So you need money to make money. But you also need to have money available that's not taxed at such a high tax rate that it doesn't make it or doesn't make it feasible to invest. Why invest? And this is just I'm going to go back to Ronald Reagan's. At the height of his movie career, the income tax was 96%. Why invest your money, or why expose your money to 96% confiscatory tax rate instead of putting it in a tax shelter that's not being taxed at that you might be making, let's say, 5% interest on that money you have in the tax shelter? Which one would you rather do? I think I'd rather make the 5% in the tax shelter and not have that exposed to that 5% exposed to 96% confiscatory tax rate. It's common sense. I mean, you don't have to be an economic genius to understand that. So capital is the key to growth. I can't emphasize that enough, but socialists don't understand that because they don't like corporations. Now he talks about his point 5 was talking about a race to the bottom with these corporate tax rates. And he says, well, we can't compete with some of these folks because they're zero. Okay, they're zero. So what? What would happen if our capital gains tax went down to zero? What would happen? You would see such a flood of money going in investments. It wouldn't be funny. I mean, it would be hilarious. to me, because it would prove once and for all these socialists and communists wrong. It would prove that Robert B. Reich isn't right. Because if there's no fear of capital gains being taxed, then that money would flow into investments all over the place. It's only common sense. The only reason why people shelter money is because of the tax rates. But if you didn't have high tax rates, that's why these tax havens, a lot of them, they don't charge any. They're zero. Whoa. You mean I can shelter my money and not have to worry about you guys taxing it at all? Yep. And the biggest thing is, and I have articles in here about race to the bottom. And some of them are hid in some other, thank goodness for tax havens, I believe it is. It's an article by Peter Ongi over at fee.org. And let me get over here. No, I was reading the wrong one. This is by Daniel Mitchell. Thank goodness for tax havens. Now he's writing this. He's writing this article from the British Virgin Islands, and he's talking about an organization called Oxfam, and they're a group that is a charity group that seeks to help to lift people out of the poor. And part of their lifting people out of the poor is a socialist program. Socialism, communism, not capitalism. And as far as my research in history goes, there has never been anybody that's been lifted out because of government spending. And I knew I was going to run out of time here. I might have to pick this up again tomorrow. But I didn't even get to point 6 and 7, which actually gets into the heart of socialism about their fair share. Covetousness and envy is their fair share. I'm going to have to pick this up again tomorrow, folks. I do apologize for the glitches I had. Hopefully, maybe I can get the glitches out and show you the last couple minutes of the video in succession here. That's why I went through the whole video with you and let it play through, and that's what I should have done from the beginning. But like I said, we're going to go over point 6 and point 7 tomorrow, because these are, I think, two of the most important points, especially about the tax. If you remember in the video, he talked about the through tax on corporations, and President Trump's tax plan would be a big boon for folks like me and you who are creators on YouTube that aren't big corporations, and we're being taxed at a higher rate because of our personal income tax instead of a lower corporate rate. And so that's going to be very, very important to understand. Again, I apologize for all the trouble I had here showing that video. I'll try to figure out what's going on after the show. That's the music. That's the end of the show. This has been the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, folks. God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow at noon.